Hey guys, welcome back. BDC Gara here. We're back with season 12, episode 10 of our weekly Q&A video podcast thing. You know what you're on right now as you're listening to this or watching this, or watching and listening, hopefully. And you can get to the other one by figuring it out. The resources, I've given you all the clues, detective. So this is the season of sort of old favorites, right?
Yeah, returning favorites.
And so today, our Injustice offering, this is the definite Injustice talk we get before, it might go off the rails and we talk about literally anything else. Right. Who are we seeing today?
So despite different characters on the team, really it's built around Batgirl Prime. She is the star. She was a recent highlight in our weekly recap because she came back in the challenges, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity. Now, she's been on the team already. We did one of the old favorites where she was sort of the star, but it was with Ares, where Ares was the main damage dealer, banging special 2, does a huge amount of damage, unblockable. But Batgirl herself, I mean, she's a star on this team for both her passive and her special 1. There's I wouldn't say a lot. I was going to say a lot, but I probably shouldn't say a lot. I've seen some threads in the Injustice Mobile subreddit where people have actually said, well, she's passé. Mm-hmm. She's no longer relevant. And I completely disagree. She is the OG special 1 nuke loadout. Her special 1... Her stats are not the greatest, admittedly. Her stats are weighted towards her health, which is also not great when we do a lot of offensive teams. But she is so easy to boost her damage to special 1, splash damage on her special 1, that she can really hang with any of the teams. Now, her passive, it might not seem like a lot, but you're getting essentially 3 bars of power spread over your whole team, right? 1 bar each. And it's not as good as, say, Tantu Totem, where you get it every time you tag back in. Mm-hmm. But having the power at the beginning, where, I mean, people might think, well, it doesn't improve after you spent the power. What do you got left? The issue really is, I think, if you set your team up properly, a lot of times when you've gone through your power, by the time you spent all 3 bars of power, the fight should be mostly over.
Yeah.
Right? So having the endurance is not nearly as important as having that huge initial damage output. It's why Arkham Origins Batman is still relevant. It's why Batgirl is still relevant. And so Cassandra Cain Batgirl's here. She is very useful. She's got Necron Scythe and Master's Death Cart. Batgirl has Cloak and Tantu Totem. And this is one of those push and pull things that the kind of game theory, I guess, that is relevant to all teams. Because Cloak Stun would be wasted on Cassandra Cain Batgirl. Don't give it to her, right? Because her passive, where she comes in and does damage, it would actually negate a stun if you were lucky enough to get the stun. And Cloak Stun would also be canceled with Master's Death Cart on the tag in on the Pitter Patter. So that means perfect. Cassandra Batgirl gets both the Necron Scythe and Master's Death Card. Claw of Horus gets 3 chances to shatter gear on Cassandra Cain Batgirl Special 1. So her gear loadout pretty much loads itself out, right? If you're thinking about it. And really, that's what you need. So the third gear on Batgirl is League of Assassins Knives to boost special 1 damage, to do splash damage. Yes, we are vulnerable when somebody's holding Brandished Ninjato, and we give a huge amount of power to whoever's holding it on the other team. But more than makes up for it for almost all the fights where you do so much splash damage that after the first opponent comes in, they're just so weak that it's almost a formality finishing off the fight. It's pretty straightforward. One thing I do want to point out that's really kind of fun. So you know how Arkham Knight Batgirl, if you are not positioned just right, so let's say you do a swipe combo, let's say you knock the other player down. If you don't wait until she gets her feet planted because she's walked closer to the opponent, what happens is she will do the stun, and then she'll do a little knee, and doesn't finish her special too, so she doesn't do the rest of the damage, even if she stuns the opponent. So there's a bunch of times where Arkham Knight Batgirl, you lose all the damage, and that's why, you know, we've done all those basic damage boosts and stun damage boosts so that she can still wipe out the opponent with a basic combo.
Yeah.
Cassandra King Batgirl is the exact opposite. Not only is her stun ranged, her follow through is hugely ranged, and you can see in a couple examples. So in this video, probably in the next, what is it now? We're at 6 minutes. In the next minute, and then in another 3 minutes, you'll see two examples where you don't have to wait for her to plant. She does a stun at distance, and she knocks the opponent out with her hugely ranged second part of her special one. And the even better is she's doing it around the 10-minute mark against Arkham Knight Batgirl. Mm-hmm. So Cassandra King Batgirl, despite having much lower stats, despite having not as good a passive, the way her special one processes, in some ways, makes her a better standalone Batgirl. Can't compare the passive for Arkham Knight Batgirl where she saves her Arkham teammates. Mm-hmm. No doubt that is the absolute best. But if you have her on a team that's not an Arkham team, then Cassandra King Batgirl, in my mind, is actually better than Arkham Knight Batgirl. What else? I think that's it. I mean, Batgirl's still relevant. She's still fun to play with. You'll notice that the real trouble, the only times the fights get extended is when the timing on Batgirl's tag in special one is not right and the opponent actually blocks. And that makes the fight drag on a bit, but otherwise it's pretty fast. If you really want to sort of guarantee yourself a faster fight, when you tag in, block, and then just wait for the basic combo opening so that you can guarantee yourself an unblocked special one. So you give up a slightly faster finish, but you sort of guarantee that you don't end up taking too long. Mm-hmm. And you see, really great is when there's opponent has health effects, where at a certain level of health, whether it's like an invulnerability of Astral Harness, John Stewart Green Lantern's invulnerability at like 10% health, she totally bypasses that. Mm-hmm. So fun. And sometimes, even better, she bypasses it for the opponents who are not even on the screen. So if they have an invulnerability that triggers, it triggers while they're off the screen. So the John Stewart Green Lantern fights, for example, if she's wiping out the strongest player on the team that has the most health, the other teammates can come in with no health, and they've already used up the part of John Stewart Green Lantern's passive that makes them useful. Mm. Love Batgirl. She is absolutely the best. Fun team.
Yeah. There we go. Do we want to get into our first question here?
Sure.
Okay. So these are a couple that are kind of paired. First one comes from Racer W1233. They say, it's been years since I've watched you guys, but I'm getting back into Injustice and it's great to see. And the next one comes from San10 Deep. And they say, I loved you guys since 5 years ago when I was first getting into Injustice and WWE Immortals. After I had some personal problems and didn't play for a while, just saw your video in the feed. All those memories came back. Time to download Injustice again. And are you guys doing Q&A? If so, who's the new meta characters now?
Are we still doing Q&A?
Yeah. Maybe. Occasionally.
Yeah.
We answer some questions sometimes.
We are doing Q&A. I think this is what we've retitled this Q&A, right? We ended up adding a lot of letters.
To me, it's kind of interesting that the game's been around for long enough that there are people who are coming back to it after like what feel like to them at least significant sort of breaks or interruptions.
We're getting a lot of comments recently just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting sort of pattern.
Yeah.
So to pull back the curtain, you put these questions in. What did you think was did you have a specific thing that you wanted to talk about when you saw these?
So it was just the meta characters, like that kind of question. The nature of that question has changed a lot. And if somebody has been gone from the game, so I pulled up the first one from Racer W1233 mainly because it's in the last couple of days, and it sort of pairs nicely with sets up nicely what San10 Deep is doing.
Yeah.
But so in the old days, people really talked a lot more about individual characters. and how good individual characters are and what tier they were. And I think what we're doing this season with the footage that we're doing with old favorite teams hews more closely to what I believe more strongly now, that it's, you can't take it in isolation. Yes, you can think about them as individual characters if you were going to try to, do a sort of modular setup, right? Just slot people in wherever willy-nilly. Mm-hmm. But I think you cannot get away from the fact that under different circumstances, different characters are better. So even great characters on their own can pale in comparison to a character that is geared properly with the right teammates. And the way of looking at an entire team instead of just one character is probably a better way to think about it. Mm-hmm. And it's only the last, I guess, couple of years that we've been way more vocal about that. But people, I think, still stick to the idea of looking at individual characters when really the number of times that you fight with just one character is, unless you choose it, right? Like, unless you choose to have one really strong character and two really weak ones, most of the time you're not fighting with one character. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's probably more consideration when you're doing offline play. You're dragging people through bonus battle 6, but let's face it, right? Bonus battle 6, most of the time you just hit the right stats and you're going to be able to drag a team of bronzes with you if you wanted to. So who's the new meta characters now? I think what you could do is just watch the last
season, because we talked about that a lot.
Yeah. So this is what is this, episode 10 you said? Mm-hmm. So this is the 10th episode. You're watching it now. You're going to see this team, but look at the previous 9 of this and you'll really see how we feel about these characters.
But also the last set of episodes of the last season specifically are tier list.
Oh, that's
episodes.
True.
That's actually probably an even better place if you're looking for the meta, right? Yeah. It's a funny time to be getting back into it because I don't remember how many it was, the last 3 or maybe 4 episodes of the last season.
That's right.
We explicitly spent most, if not the entirety of all those episodes just talking about other people's tier lists and what they were, how we felt about it. And then in the last one, we went through sort of our opinion on a tier list. So we actually answered this exact question in the most exhaustive way we ever have pretty recently.
Yeah, that's right. We spent 3? Was it 4? 3 or 4 episodes talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's funny. It's we're not going to obviously go through it again because it's too fresh.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting. The reason why I like the question really because it highlights that shift in thinking, because you're right. Somebody who hasn't played for 5 years would not have heard us go into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. Our next comment comes from Andrew Wabe, 7822, and they say, so if you were to put this Superman into a team, where would he fit best? As a tank, a special specialist, or just a third support option? And this was talking about Godfall Superman.
Right. So as a primary special specialist, I mean, he's not actually blocking that much to take advantage of his passive, and his passive is really good. So what you'd want to do is be blocking a bunch to make him more powerful. Because let's face it, if he's just your special specialist and you gear him with Master's Death Card and Tantu Totem, his special 2, it's unblockable, but too much of the damage happens before the freeze, before the opponent is going to eat an unblockable part of it. Mm-hmm. And overall, even if they don't block everything, it feels like the amount of damage that we're getting is not enough. And maybe it's because it's reduced a bit for the status effect.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many better options as a special specialist that maybe he's a secondary sort of tanky special specialist as a fallback if you have an accident and your primary specialist gets knocked out. Or I guess, when you make a mistake and your primary special specialist can't finish off a character, you tag him in, you let him eat a little bit of damage and block a little bit, generate some power. But I don't know that he's good enough to really be the star. And I think we've gotten a little bit away from the idea that every team has to have a tank. Because we've just gotten so many teams that when we rely on high damage output, you don't really need a tank the same way. Maybe you need somebody who can eat a little bit of damage sometimes, but not that traditional where, maybe we've gotten too reliant on Hawkgirl, but we've gotten away from having to leave somebody to sit there and eat damage and last long enough for your main character to tag back in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There we go.
So that's probably us.
Yeah.
That's an us problem.
Mm-hmm. We're moving kind of briskly today. We're getting through questions a lot faster than normal. But this next one comes from Burke's Homemade Memes. And they say, surprised anyone remembers TF2 even exists. I still play it to this day as it's kind of, quote, cult classic, at least in terms of video games. Lots of influences like memes and even the hat economy, etc. I think the sentiment could be a bit similar to this game, except this game has less players, but both places have this loyal fan base that seems to, quote, never actually leave the game. And this is interesting. Do you want to do this one first? Because you've tied this with an older comment from Burke.
There was another comment question from Burke Show Me Mad MMS.
Yeah.
That we never got around to, and it just keeps getting buried as we get new questions.
So maybe we'll do them one at a time, though.
Yes, I think one at a time.
So one thing, I think TF2 is one of those games that's in an interesting kind of spot, right? Because I think we have a really sort of strong desire to talk about games in terms of being like dead games or, you know, like live and whatever. And with TF2, I haven't played it very much in the past couple of years, but I have still kind of followed it because it was like one of my favorite games for like a little while.
Okay.
And so there's been a bunch of stuff. One of the things was that TF2 has like a daily active user number of like 175,000 people, which is a lot.
Is it? Okay,
or like I don't know if that's a concurrent max in a day or whatever, but that there's like hundreds of thousands of people.
Okay.
And one of the things that I saw was that there was a video not too long ago, a couple months ago at this point, that went through it and looked at why that number seems to be largely made up of botted accounts. And for one reason or another, that there's a lot of like fake activity. And part of that is because there's, well, you almost have to watch the video to understand, but there are, you know, there's like a hat economy, right? There's resources that you can get, and there's some resources that you get just from sitting passively in the game.
Okay.
And so there's a bot problem in TF2, both within games. There was a lot of like cheating bots for a while, and it wasn't being addressed for a very long time. So there are certain like game modes and stuff that were pretty unplayable apparently in TF2. And the other thing is that it seems like there's a lot of bots idling in main menus. So the number of real sort of max concurrent players in a given day was much lower, but it was still like above 50,000 if I remember correctly. So that's like a pretty healthy player count, right?
Okay.
It's not massive. It's definitely, you know, but it's a game that's like, I think it's like 12 years old or something. Like, it's not a new game. Right. So for a game that is so old, and there's also, I think, a joke sort of with Valve or like TF2 fans that like Valve has kind of abandoned the game. Very little new stuff happened for the game. And it's a similar kind of thing with Injustice, where I think there's this palpable sense of feeling kind of like nobody's working on it anymore. Like nobody's doing anything for the game really. That makes people feel like it's less exciting, it's less vital. There's less things going on. There's less reasons for people to sort of show up, you know?
Okay, so I've been pretty open. I don't play a lot of other games. So I've never played Team Fortress 2. I sort of have an idea just from watching you play a few times.
Yeah.
But isn't there a fundamental difference where Team Fortress 2, if you don't have anybody else playing at that moment, it's pretty much dead.
Yeah.
Injustice, you almost couldn't tell if the developers or just anybody wanted to seed the game with a lot of teams.
Yeah.
We're used to playing
fake
the AI.
leaderboards.
Yeah, we're just used to playing the AI. So it feels like there's a fundamental difference where if you could not maintain the audience for Team Fortress 2, it would really die.
Yeah. And so I do think that, like, I would say that TF2 is still known and is still liked, and there are still, like, content creators that are making, like, I think, you know, I'm thinking of, like, Uncle Dane and some other like TF2 YouTubers.
Right over my head.
Who are making like their full-time career, their main thing. I was, cause I know Uncle Dane like works on some other projects and stuff.
Okay.
But for some YouTubers out there are people who are essentially like their full-time career is still making TF2 content.
And when you say full-time career, you don't mean like us, because all our content is really Injustice, but we're not making a career.
This is not a
full-time
full-time career.
Right. So you mean not just that their main thing is that,
I think I'm pretty sure it's their job. Yeah.
So they're doing, not only are they doing that as their main thing, but they're doing enough of it and generating, grabbing enough eyeballs that
Yeah.
they can do that full time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I feel like we do have this, and we as like just people broadly have this urge to categorize it as like, oh, this is a dying game, this is a dead game, this is whatever. And I think in the case of TF2, it's definitely not reaching those like huge player highs of like newer games. Like for example, Deadlock again has like more and more maximum like concurrent users, and I think it reached like 180 something thousand recently, so that's already like higher than TF2's, right?
Okay.
And it is still an invite only, so Deadlock is clearly on this trajectory to have like a very healthy player base, have a ton of people in it, because this is still, you know, people have to actively be trying to play this a lot more than you do for a lot of other like free to play online multiplayer games.
Right.
There's a slightly higher barrier to entry. So the fact that there are so many people already playing it, and I, you know, after this, we finish filming here, I'm probably going to go play a game of Deadlock.
Right.
So it's, you know, clearly like the shiny new thing, right? Very popular. But definitely, I think there are a lot of people still playing it. You know, I think everybody who's played it is sort of aware of its existence. And I think on some level, like it is like at a base level, what Burke was talking about here is that there is a huge amount of cultural impact of TF2. If you look at sort of a lot of the popular shooters right now, Overwatch and Overwatch 2 came very clearly out of TF2. The whole idea of like a hero shooter in general, I think, I'm not sure if TF2 is the first, but it's certainly the one that people are looking to when they're looking at what new games are coming out with. And specifically, just like if you look at Valve's impact as a company together, they made CSGO. And if you think about like what one of the most popular shooters is right now, it's Valorant, which is a hero shooter that has essentially like CSGO's like tactical shooter like mechanics.
What's the other shooter? The one that my brother's playing. What's that one?
Fortnite.
Is that up there?
That's very different. So Fortnite is a battle royale game, which was, I think, actually popularized mechanically maybe in Minecraft with like Minecraft Hunger Games stuff. So battle royales are the other huge.
Don't they share a bit of DNA? Like, isn't there? I mean, battle royale just means how you end up ultimately. But in terms of like,
they're very different.
Are they? Is there enough different? Because all right, so to me, as somebody who's outside looking in, you're running around, you're shooting other people. There's no cooperation, but to me, that's the main difference.
It's very different because it's 100 people, usually somewhere around there. It's a free for all or a small groups thing. You're in an open world map. So, you know, instead of having a much smaller thing, it's like comparing like sort of like our house to like our entire neighborhood, right? Like it's on an entirely different scale. The pace and tempo is super different because you're dropping in every time totally fresh, usually without weapons, right? So you're literally scavenging weapons from the area.
Okay.
And it's also like Fortnite, for example, is a third-person shooter, which does feel very different. Deadlock is a third-person shooter, but like that sort of basic level of like you seeing your character in the environment and doing over-the-shoulder changes a lot of how the gunplay tends to function and all that stuff.
Because I still remember some games where you could shift between over-the-shoulder and first-person, so to me that separation didn't seem that big.
You kind of can in games like Fortnite with scopes, but it is huge, and that's why like scopes are so helpful, because there's a certain kind of lack of precision, I think, relatively, when you're dealing with third person. The movement doesn't sort of correspond quite as like one-to-one as closely as you'd want it to. And, you know, if you're talking about Fortnite, there's different modes of it, but there's a build mode, which is very different, right? Which has you like actually like building structures with some of the resources you've scavenged. You're picking up guns and weapons, but you're also like literally like breaking down walls and like making buildings. And I think at a high level play, it becomes really about like how quickly you can make like good structures to like get like high ground and like gain like tactical advantage. So they're I think very different. I think if anything, battle royales are probably like the most different shooter compared to like TF2 or CSGO that is out there. With maybe the other exception is like sort of those Call of Duty style shooters that don't have a huge amount of Valve DNA in them. But a lot of the really popular like first person shooter games out right now have a huge amount of inspiration from either TF2 or Valve games more broadly. So I think it's hard to kind of understate or hard to overstate, I think, how impactful a lot of Valve's like early older games, including TF2, have been on the modern formula. So I think even though I haven't played TF2 in a very long time, I think almost every video game I play with my friends online with any sort of regularity has a very clear lineage back to TF2 as a game. So I think it would be hard for me to forget TF2 for a lot of reasons. Yeah. And I guess you probably don't have any thoughts about TF2 itself.
Not about TF2.
But maybe the sentiment of the loyal players, people who, like, quote, never leave.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at it. I'm sort of answering this question a little bit from the outside because, like we said before, the fact that we were doing this content means that we have our own sort of internal reason for.
That's kind of why we're here in a lot of ways.
So it doesn't change that. So if we're looking at reasons why there's other people doing, because not everybody's doing a channel, right? Yeah. So I have to sort of use my imagination a bit, but I'd imagine that if I weren't doing this stuff, this Injustice
that you
stuff,
probably wouldn't be playing.
I probably wouldn't be playing nearly as much. I probably wouldn't be enjoying it near the same way because there's a level of play where when I force myself to play sometimes when I don't feel like it, or just maybe that's not the right way to put it. It's that I'm playing way more often, I'm putting way more time into the game than I would otherwise. And I'm discovering things about it that I didn't realize and I wouldn't have realized if I hadn't put in the time. Like those little nuances, right? Like when the exercise that probably made the biggest difference was playing all the challenge characters in the weeks that they had, and then spending an entire season of a Q&A doing all the challenge characters that we hadn't had in a while. So basically doing all the challenge characters that have ever been. Yeah. And it gave me a greater appreciation. This is why I think sometimes when people, you see the leaderboard and they got hack teams and they're really crappy, or there's people on the boards that say, hey, I've got all this. And when they say all this, they've got literally
like
everything at a high level and all the gears, all the characters. And he says, oh, so how should I put a team together?
Yeah.
And that tells me that there's so much that you miss out on. I used to get really super frustrated by how long it took to accumulate the stuff you needed.
Yeah.
But I can have a better appreciation for how it's helped me enjoy the game more. Yeah. And so
I think they could have introduced stuff much faster still, but there is a value for it not being instant, certainly.
Yeah.
For earning it, not just for the sense of sort of accomplishment, but on a fundamental, like, understanding level of the game to build up your knowledge more incrementally.
So I guess the point that I was getting around to and that was sort of percolating in my mind is that the people who have stuck around have probably found an enjoyment in the game that they didn't have when they first started. And the amazing part isn't that there's still people sticking around. The amazing part to me is that there's still new people finding the game.
Yeah.
And I'm getting that sense from people on the subreddit, but also some of the comments that we get. So it's a nice mix of people who've been around long enough that they, it's like the second win when you go do endurance stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you feel like you've hit the wall, and then all of a sudden you break through the wall, and it's like, wow, it's almost like a high. Yeah. I think it's that. There's people like that, and then there's another group that are more amazing to me who find this more than 10-year-old game and start playing and think, wow, this is kind of fun.
Well, I think it has a lot of the same fun that it always had. So I think, like, it's the finding it, I think, that is more unlikely as opposed to the enjoying it once you have found it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where, like, if you think about, I think most things that get big enough end up with sort of those small contingent of, like, relatively diehard fans. Yeah. And I'm thinking of, like, the speedrunning community, right? Specifically, because you look at games that have objectively much less content in them, that are often single player, right? That you get like maybe 5. The length of your intended experience with it is like less than 20 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And for Injustice, because you're supposed to be grinding and stuff, there's a higher like time ask on a basic level just to get everything, right?
Right.
If you sort of meet the game where it's at and say, I want to get everything, you're looking at like hundreds or thousands of hours, right? Guaranteed. So you look at games that you can beat in like 3 hours, and that specifically the whole point of the speedrunner is to try to get that time as low as possible, right? And you can see the way that communities form around it, and that there are people who just play this game over and over and over again, right? I think that, like, separate from the way that you're sort of made or like pushed to interact with it by the developer, I think anytime something reaches a certain sort of critical mass of people, there's a decent chance that there will be at least some people that really stick with it past sort of the amount that the developer was expecting, that they interact with it on another different, deeper level, right? And so I am, on some level, I'm more surprised than anything else that we are the people who are not leaving the game, right? Because I know that there are people like that, but I've never had a lot of insight into how, you know, speedrunners think, because I don't see playing a game over and over and over again. The closest I've ever gotten to that was the game Neon White, which specifically has sort of times in it, and it is a game that's clearly meant to be speedrunned. A game that is meant to be played in that way. And so there were some levels where I was, you know, playing them over and over again to get those like better times in the higher tier medals. But that was sort of very clearly within the context of the game. And the punchline to that is that I did that so much on the earlier levels that I never beat the game. That I spent all that extra time with the individual chunks of it, and I never actually got all the way through the intended experience. Which would have taken me much less time than going over and over again. And when the game came out, me and a bunch of my friends all got it. And so there was a couple of us that were playing it a lot, and so that was still kind of a social experience where I was playing the game over and over again. I was on a call with somebody, and we're trying to figure out sort of how to crack the time on the level, if there's any like routes or tricks or whatever, right? And so you know, that's the closest insight I've ever had to sort of speedrunners, or sticking with something and just doing the same thing over and over again in it. But so on a base level, I think it doesn't entirely surprise me that this happened to Injustice, because there was enough people that loved it that there was always going to be some number, right? As long as you can keep the sense of community alive, they'll find and stay in that community, and it'll motivate you, and it'll be kind of this loop in the cycle. But I am on a deeper level surprised that it was us, that we stuck on this, because I in general, you know, even when I play a game with my friends, and I play it a lot, right? I am not laboring under the illusion that that's going to be my thing forever, that it's the game, because I always know that it's the time with the people, right?
Forever so long.
Well, but not even for, just, you know, for years and years. I'm just like, this is a lot of fun. I'm going to play this until it stops being fun, and then, you know, we as a group are going to move on to the next thing. The community isn't part of the game. The game comes into the community, and it can go out of the community, you know? But I think that's a good enough discussion of this, and we have not gotten to the other question. So I'm going to make
we'll save that
a commitment. First one next week, no matter what, no matter how important and immediate the questions are next week. Burke, we will get to your second old comment.
Your
next
first,
week. your first old comment. So I think this is a good time as any to finish up. We'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our lovely patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, Nora Klimek, and Paolo-Cesar-Pablo-Juan, supporting us on the credited level, as well as 5x5 supporting us on the gratitude level. We'd also like to give a huge thank you to anybody who's here at the end of the video, anybody who supports us in any way other than directly throwing a little bit of money at us. Although we do feel the need to read the names out and mark special appreciation for people who've given us money, because we know exactly, I can measure in dollars how much they like us. So it's a lot easier to sort of see that. But yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.